Thank you all for coming. I think what I was going to say about the overall concept for the conference was really stated so well by Tom that I don't need to repeat that. But we are here today to begin a dialogue, a discussion in the spirit of inquiry and evaluation. We've drawn speakers from all over the world who have major responsibilities for caring for the great tapestries, the great historic tapestry collections. And I look forward to a chance to look at the main subjects that concern tapestry conservators with perspective from history of treatment to what we can learn from new tools of science and technology about what we're doing to these great works of art. So with that, I'd like to open the symposium by introducing our first speaker, Tim Husband. Tim is the curator of medieval art and the Cloisters and is this first speaker today. Tim joined the staff of the Metropolitan Museum in 1970, having attended Harvard University, Institute of Fine Arts, and Columbia University. He is currently the president of, and I'm going to massacre this, Corpus Vitrarum Medi Avi in the United States, and has curated many exhibitions here and at the Metropolitan and in Europe. His many publications include The Wild Man, Medieval Myth and Symbolism, The Medieval House Book and the Art of Illumination, and The Art of Illumination, The Limbourg Brothers, and the Belle Heure of Jean de France, Duc de Berry, which is also the basis for an exhibition scheduled to open at the Met in the spring. Tim Husband and Nobuko Kajitani were collectively responsible for initiating the restoration of the Cloisters Burgos tapestry. This entailed an ongoing collaboration between conservators and curators, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank Tim for his support, patience, good humor, and curatorial expertise over the years. I'm pleased to present Tim Husband.
Thank you, Tina, for those kind words. I must start by saying that my remarks today are advertised in a seriously overstated fashion on the program. I am not going to be talking about the conservation of tapestries. You're going to hear plenty about that by people far more competent than I to discuss it with you. But I wanted to, well, let me say that this past Friday, I saw the Burgos tapestry, as we call it, installed in the newly renovated late Gothic hall at the Cloisters. And I stood there and said to myself, you know, I really didn't think I was ever going to see this day. But we did see it. It looks splendid. It looks more than splendid. It looks radiant and extraordinary. And I urge you all to get up to the Cloisters as quickly as possible to see it. It's been over 35 years in the making, this project, and I thought what I would do is just share with you sort of some of the anecdotal beginnings of the project. I arrived at the Cloisters actually in 1969 as a summer fellow. I was somewhat surprised to find in an office on the second floor, which was then one huge open room, a very large tapestry shredded into four irregular pieces on the floor. I was aware that there was a conversation going on about this tapestry, but I was so junior that I was not part of the conversation. I was aware that there was heated discussion about washing and methods of washing, and which this tapestry should be subjected to. Apparently, there was an experiment taken on a medieval tapestry considered of no importance. I've never figured out which one that was. They washed it, and in a wet wash, I forgot whether it was soap or detergent, but I remember that was a key issue. The experiment was unsuccessful. The fragment shrunk in irregular fashion and no longer fitted together. And there was a memo following that experiment by Bill Forsyth, then curator of the medieval department, bringing the whole discussion to the end, saying, we're not going to do this. I came on the staff of the Met in 1970 and very shortly became very familiar with Nabucco Cacciatani as we became involved in the great masterpieces of tapestry exhibition that opened in 1972 in Paris and then came to the Met the following year. And the issue that I was charged with and Nabucco was how to prepare the unicorn tapestries to be shipped safely to Paris and returned to New York. And it was a daunting task. I must say that Nabucco was brilliant throughout the entire thing. We were dealing with unknown issues, frankly. There was no experience, there was no record. We didn't really know what to do. And so we simply had to analyze it and make the best possible choices. Anyway, that exhibition came and went, and the tapestries returned to the Cloisters with no apparent damage. At that point, Nabucco and I seriously entered in a discussion as to what to do with the Burgos tapestry. And we, in about 1973, had resolved to press ahead with this and see this tapestry in and through restoration. There were many, many issues involved. There's how we were going to do this, what the methodology would be. And there were practical things like there was no space. There was no conservation lab at the time. There was no equipment. There was no money, of course. And most importantly, we had not really worked out a philosophy of approach to the restoration. But we pressed on with this, and by September of 1974, the first section of the Burgos tapestry was sent to Bashir and Company on Madison Avenue for cleaning. Nabucco was more than satisfied with their ability to undertake the work, and we still at the Met didn't have the equipment to do it ourselves. In 1975, we bought this amazing Ahiba laboratory dyeing machine, and then involved in trying to find a place to set it up, and that began sort of a turf war within this building that went on for several years. So there's, these turf wars go on and on. In June of 1976, Nabucco and her team had determined that the Burgos would be stitched back together and mounted on a roller loom, and it would be worked on in that fashion. And so the first step was to have this roller loom made, and we ordered it, and it was delivered 6 weeks later for $2,750. In June of that year, 1976, Nabucco and Jane Hutchins went off to Greensboro, North Carolina, to the Ciba-Geigy to learn how to operate this dyeing machine we had just purchased. And then in June and July of that year, the issue of wool came up. Obviously, wool was needed to do the restoration work. We had none. None was commercially available or privately available in this country. We had discussed the issue with other conservators around, in Europe, in this country, and Nabucco, who knew Mathilde Fleury-Lemberg, who was then conservator at the Abegg Stiftung in Switzerland very well, and was very impressed by her methods and her materials. And it was decided that the wool we needed, which was raw, untreated, hand-spun, natural wool, was available only in Czechoslovakia. And so it fell to me to deal with this problem. We had had several exchanges of letters with the curator at the National Museum in Prague, Renata Restislova, and she kept writing back letters, one in December of that year, the previous year, and one in January or February of '76, saying, we only make what we can use. We were asking for 5 kilograms. She said that we would never have that amount available, and we can't help you. And what, of course, we didn't understand was that all these negative letters were in fact saying, yes, please come, we want to sell you this, this material, but they couldn't say so in a letter because of the communist authorities. I went to London and thought, I was very nervous that this was going to be this long and expensive trip resulting in nothing. So I thought, well, I'd try to improve my chances. So I went to the Czech embassy in London and went to the commercial division and said that I wanted to buy wool in Czechoslovakia. And the attaché looked at me and said, how much? And I said, 5 kilos. And he looked at me stonily and said, the only wool we sell comes in carpets, and 300 yards is the minimum. So off I went to Prague, not particularly encouraged, and arrived. I went to the conservation labs and met Renata. She couldn't have been more gracious. She showed me around, and as time went on, I sort of thought, well, when are we going to discuss what I'm here about? And she finally took me out, and we had a coffee, and she said, tomorrow morning, you should go to Charles Square, and in the southeast corner, there's a man selling ice cream, and he will talk to you. And I suddenly realized that I unwittingly had gotten myself into sort of a John le Carré plot, which I really didn't think I belonged in. So I dutifully went off, met the ice cream man. He gave me a piece of paper with a name and an address on it. I was to go there that afternoon. I did. As I was walking through, this was in the old part of Prague, I suddenly heard music everywhere, and I suddenly realized I was near the musical conservatory, and in fact, my destination turned out to be the Musical Instruments Museum, which had formerly been Mozart's house, where he wrote the Prague Symphony. So I wandered around the galleries, and it was not hard to spot because I was the only one there. And a man came up to me and said, he asked me what flight I was on because I was leaving the next day. And he said, you should go through customs on the far right lane, and after you go through security, there will be a man there who will give you a package. And he handed me an invoice. And I left and went to the airport the following day with no minor amount of trepidation, I must say. And went through, and indeed, after security, a man was there. He handed me a package wrapped in brown paper. I got on the plane. It took off, and an hour and a half later, I was in Zurich. I shipped the package to New York with the invoice and said, please pay this right away. Some people have gone out on a limb, and we can't let them down. I noticed, of course, that the payment was made to a numbered Swiss account, which and of course, they were using this to finance their own restoration program because the government was not helping them in that regard. So I came back. The wool seemed to be just what Nabucco and her team needed. In the fall of that year, October of '77, we were still working our way through the space issue, but we got a space that had previously been occupied by Asian textile conservation, and the equipment for dyeing was set up, and the program got underway. And so for the next however many decades or so, that project progressed. When the tapestry finally came off that roller loom, because you see it was for years, they just rolled from one to the other roll, and they were doing the restoration work on this huge tapestry in long vertical strips. We never could see the whole thing. And my concern was, well, this is going on for years and years. Who's going to So when it came off, we hung it provisionally in one of the ESDA galleries. And I came back by myself on a Monday when no one was there and just stared at it and truly marveled at what brilliant work Alice, Tina, and all those who worked with her had done on this tapestry, because it came through this long, protracted restoration with them not being able to see 90% of what they were working on, with utter and complete visual coherence. And when you see it at the tapestry hanging at the Cloisters, it's almost impossible to see where the cuts had been rewoven and put back together. The areas that had totally lost all their wefts were restored. As you know, it's a tapestry with 8 or more different scenes into it. They visually flow one to the other with utter clarity. And to me, it's just a miracle of restoration work. And I think Tina, Alice, and the Conservation Department deserve great kudos. Thank you.